We get started, I think we may still have a few more people joining us. Hello, everyone. I'm Katie Mathias with the Conservation Finance Alliance Secretariat, and welcome to the fourth Practice Standards webinar, highlighting the 2020 edition of the new Practice Standards for Conservation Trust Funds. This webinar series has been brought to you by the Environmental Funds Working Group of the Conservation Finance Alliance, and we are happy to have everyone here. So today we are talking about the standards on administration and human resources. The human resources standards in particular are new with the 2020 edition. And as you can see from the screen, we'll be hosting webinars throughout the year to highlight different aspects of the 2020 edition of the standards, bringing up the new, completely new core areas, new cross-cutting themes, and even for standards where the core areas are the same, like asset management, we'll be highlighting new standards that have been brought up in this new edition. So today we have two speakers, Paquita Bass, who is going to give an overview of what's new in this edition of the standards, and then Miriam de Koning will provide a case study overview of the Nature Trust Alliance to share practical experiences of this particular area of the standards. A few quick messages. As I asked, if you have a chance, please put your name and where you're from in the chat. Make sure that it goes to panelists and attendees. It helps us to see where everyone's coming from. And if you have questions, we'll have a Q&A session after the presentations. Please put your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom, and we'll address them as we get towards the end. So with that, let me turn it over to Paquita, who is the principal of Aligning Visions and the co-author both of the 2020 edition of the Practice Standards, as well as the 10-year review of conservation trust funds, both of which are available on the CFA website, and we'll put the link into the chat as well. So Paquita, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie, and welcome everybody. Thank you, Maria Luisa, for putting this up. So very briefly, this was just a pleasure to work on. I worked with Wolf's Company on this. We obviously adjusted the work from the 2014 version by Barry Spergel and Kathleen Mickerton, and worked a lot with CFA to make this happen. So just want to kind of walk you through what some of the big changes are for administration and HR in this 2020 version of the practice standards. Next screen. Very briefly, I do facilitation and planning for lots of nonprofits, do evaluations of large programs and help with capacity building. And so it was just a really nice ability to get involved in this particular piece of looking at best practices across a range of conservation trust funds. Next. So what we're going to do today is look at the 2014 standards, what the new standards are that have been added, and then a lot of the annexes, which I think will be really helpful to all of you who are looking at how to apply some of these. Next, Maria Luisa. Thanks. So the 2014 standards, as you know, have just been a really important document for conservation trust funds around the world. And they had a very simple organizing principle that we have maintained through these standards. We've added the new standards that were requested by CTFs, and today we're going to talk about human resources, but it also included risk management and technology, among other things that we kind of added in to the 2014 standards. In a couple of cases, there were some edits on the existing standards and some regrouping. So I'm going to go through what that looks like. And then we called them cross-cutting themes in some of these areas. So next. So this is what the standards now look like. There's 7 core areas, starting with governance, this top screen, institutional effectiveness program, and today we're discussing administration. And then we had 4 things come up as cross-cutting themes. Communications, which was new, human resources new, and technology new. We moved monitoring and evaluation to cross-cutting because there was monitoring and evaluation pieces happening here. And then the other new area was risk management and safeguards. So today we're looking at this intersection of administration and human resources. All in all, there were 19 new standards added to the 2014 version, 6 of those being in administration that we're going to discuss today. Next. So administration currently covers HR, operations manuals and financial, the use of like audits and things like that, procurement and technology. So there's 5 practices in the HR area, 3 in technology and 4 in budget and ops areas. Two of the pieces kind of overlap between technology and HR. So we definitely have some overlapping areas here. Next. So how conservation trust funds support their staff and advance the mission through staff. In the 2014 version, there was already quite a bit of information on the role of the executive director or the CEO, and obviously the need to make sure that your human resource policies completely conform to the country laws in each area. What was added this year with the 2020 version was the need for clear organizational charts. It was one of the things that many CTFs were requesting. The need for clear annual goals and performance reviews for staff. Issues of safety and well-being of staff members came up in a number of countries, and so we were really felt that was important to add. And then along with the need for risk management and safeguard, the need to protect whistleblowers as a policy within conservation trust funds emerged. So those were kind of the key new themes in the human resources side of this. Next. So these are currently the 12 human resource practice standards. As you can tell, a couple of them show up in governance because they're about the conflict of interest policies and about how the board of directors oversees the chief executive. Those were already in place. The administrative standards, some of these are in place and some of them are new that are here in purple. The need to conform to country laws, the need for clear job descriptions, the need for org charts, the issue of performance management with clear goals and performance reviews. Standard 5, compensation and benefits based on a scale within experience, education, and performance arenas. Administrative standard 6, the ability to really give staff the technology they need and make, this is kind of the overlap with technology, how to ensure that staff really know how to use the technology and use the passwords properly, update passwords, use things from home. Obviously with COVID, this becomes even more important as so many conservation trust funds have had to adjust this year to work from home issues. So just that whole technology staff support interface. And then cybersecurity is number 11. And then, as I mentioned, the risk management and safeguards issues, some of that did overlap with human resources. The need to have somebody who's really looking at the risk management and clear roles and accountability for oversight, the need to secure the safety and well-being of staff, and then the whistleblowers that I mentioned earlier. So these are the 12 HR practice standards in the 2020 practice version. And the other thing that we did was we really looked at this across a couple different annexes. So I wanted to just quickly walk you through that. Next. So as we all know, CTFs have different levels of evolution from startup CTFs to CTFs that are terminating. Keep going, Maria Luisa. So YABA really helped to kind of say, hey, we really need to include this idea within this practice standards. So thank you, YABA. I saw you were on. The period of design and legal incorporation has different HR needs, and obviously once an organization is in full operational flow. So this kind of gives you a sense of which parts of the administration and HR practice standards would be most useful at these different stages. Next. So this is kind of what it looks like at the evolutionary stage of a CTF. You need to make sure that your policies are being set up to conform. So that cuts across all of them. The clear job descriptions, you don't need it in pre-registration, you clearly need it in startup. So I think you can see how this works. It's just a helpful guide to kind of see where to really focus your time and energy on different standards at different stages of conservation trust fund evolution. Next. Okay, Annex 2. how to use the standards, we had a lot of people that were really interested in evaluating their conservation trust fund against the practice standards to kind of see how well they were living up to best practices. So Annex 2 is basically an opportunity to go through each of the practice standards, the use of evidence by that was in the 2014 in terms of how these standards are laid out, and then actually give yourselves a rating. So it's just a tool that can be adjusted for each of the conservation trust funds as you find it useful, but it is designed precisely for that opportunity. Next. Annex 3 is really just shows you where all the cross-cutting themes are. It's really useful if you're the HR director for a conservation trust fund and you want to see where all of the standards are in one spot. So this shows you all of the human resource standards and where they fall within the different parts of the overall standards. And finally, Annex 4, a number of conservation trust funds had already been doing a great job of evaluating themselves for the practices. And so it just shows you where the administrative standard for 2014 is now listed to help make that transition a little bit easier for people who are looking to transition to use the 2020 standard. So those are the 4 annexes that I think will be really helpful to many of you as you start using the 2020 standards. Allowing you to see, you know, gee, in this case, we merged standard 2 and 3 and it's now called standard 6. So just kind of shows you where these different pieces have fallen over time. Next. So I'd love to take any questions and make sure we turn this over to Miriam to look at how it's actually being applied in the Nature Trust.
Thanks so much, Paquita.
Sure.
I will now turn it over to Miriam de Koning. Miriam is the Executive Director of the Prespa Orid Nature Trust, which is a member of the Nature Trust Alliance. And so she's here today to talk to us about the Nature Trust Alliance, which is a shared services organization that provides administrative investment and other support to a group of conservation trust funds. So Miriam, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Katie, and thanks, Paquita, for the introduction on the standards on administration. And yes, I'm very happy to present how Prespa Orid Nature Trust, in short POND, is doing its administration, or basically main part of the administration. And we do this together with 4 members, 4 conservation trust funds. And you see the logos below, but I will introduce them. We have the Caucasus Nature Fund, then we have POND. Both of them are regional trust funds, and we are based in the regions with our office. We have global funds, Blue Action Fund, and the recently joined Legacy Landscapes Fund. So 4 funds, they have a shared services office in Frankfurt called the Nature Trust Alliance. And what brings us together? All 4 conservation trust funds, we are registered in the state of Hesse in Germany. We have a major donor, the German government, through the KfW. That's also what we share. And we, of course, all contribute to very important conservation actions all over the world, but not in Germany. So we are registered in Germany, but we are working, of course, somewhere else with CNF POND based in the regions and the Blue Action Fund and Legacy Landscape Fund having their seat in Germany, in Berlin, but not in Frankfurt. Next slide, please. What is NTA, the Nature Trust Alliance, doing for its members for the 4 CTFs? They provide operational support to us so that we can focus really on our grant programs. So they really help us with the administrative tasks. It was established in 2016 jointly by CNF and POND. And the reason was that CNF decided to move their head office from Paris to the Caucasus. And the POND board decided also that it was better for the POND team to sit in the West Balkans where we operate, but we acknowledged the need for administrative support in Germany where we are registered. So we opened an office in 2016 in Frankfurt. Next. And then we had the Blue Action Fund joining in March 2017. And of course, with 3 members, it already gets more complicated. So we really used 2017 and 2018 to start setting up really clear procedures, operations manual, employee handbook, and working out on standard operating procedures for administration. Which next? Results today in an NTA office. Maria, next. With 1 director, 3 employees, and we also had a new member joining in December 2020, the Legacy Landscapes Fund. Next slide, please. What is NTA doing for us? We can have it in 3 blocks: the financial part, accounting and investment support. Then the Nature Trust Alliance is helping us with human resources, administration, IT services. And then we have knowledge sharing, donor tracking, communications and publicity. And I will zoom into these 3 areas. Next, please. NTA is helping the Conservation Trust Funds every year with their budget planning and preparation, but also the management of the bank accounts, the financial management and the cash management. Of course, every year we are audited by one of the auditing firms, and the NTA starts really preparing the audit for us and helping us with all the issues related to Germany, so that the CTFs really have to supply, in addition, some information on their grants program, but say 75% of all the audit preparations is done by the NTA for us. CNF and POND also share same investment committee and investment policy, in which we also have a self-managed portfolio of investments. And a lot of administrative work is needed to be done linked to that, with investment subscriptions, and all of that is services provided by the Nature Trust Alliance to support the CTFs. Next, please. Of course, this all comes with a lot of also the filing systems that we need. And of course, we had a couple of years ago, we had new legislation in Germany on data protection law, which also was handled by Nature Trust Alliance on behalf of the CTFs. IT support is centralized and organized via NTA. For the human resources, especially the staff employed in Germany, there's a lot of support also given by the Nature Trust Alliance. And this is very useful, of course, if we have a new CTF, like the Legacy Landscapes Fund, where a board decides, okay, we start up, the Nature Trust Alliance can also help with the recruitment of the executive director and the first staff of the CTF. Next, please. Because we are 4 funds all based and registered in Hessen, of course, it's also, it brings us together to share ideas and to exchange. So we often have sessions on certain topics together, and we support each other wherever we can. NTA helps us with the tracking of donor contributions, with donor reporting, and sometimes for fundraising activities and events. Our websites are centralized from Germany, the Frankfurt office, and NTA can help us with preparation of board meetings, communication materials, and all of that, or if events needs to be organized. Next, please. How is NTA managed? We have, of course, the 3 Conservation Trust Fund that really started with the Nature Trust Alliance, and the executive directors rotate as a focal point to give guidance to the NTA director and ensure the work plan, the annual work plan, the performance work plan, and the performance review of the NTA director. And the NTA director manages the NTA staff. We have at the moment 4 full-time staff in NTA, the director, and 3 staff underneath the director. 1 staff focusing more on communications and operations, and 2 people focusing more on finance and administration. Next, please. The focal point, so one of the executive directors manages is direct line management of the NTA director. We first did this every 6 months because things needed to be in place, but slowly but surely the standard operation procedures really start to function, and now we have the function more like 1 year. One of the executive directors is doing this job. The focal point also ensures communication between the conservation trust funds on critical issues. We have 3 times per year a more strategic meeting, a management committee meeting, of which we try to come together once every year. in person, and twice we have online meetings. But we also have every 2 weeks, we have calls together on operational issues, for which the NTA always prepares an active task plan and to see if there are pending issues, if things need to be followed up. But in reality, these meetings are quite short, like 45 minutes once every 2 weeks, and we are through it. We also developed a memo for decisions that need to be taken, and the NTA director then prepares a memo with the background and recommendations for the decision to be taken, and which can then be done by email. Next, please. What are the benefits of such shared service officers for administrations? Of course, we have economies of scale. I give an example. When the new law or legislation on data protection came into place, Nature Trust Alliance researched what needs to be done. They researched it once, and now it can be used by 4 different conservation trust funds. So that's really very efficient. We share the same auditors, we have the same custodian bank, so we also have a stronger position to negotiate with these service providers. I already mentioned the knowledge sharing on various topics, the joint investment committee and investment policy by CNF and POND, and the standard operating procedures continuously are being improved by the NTA staff and becomes very efficient. We had recently the Legacy Landscapes Fund joining, and also the experience of the Blue Action Fund, that it's really helpful for new conservation trust fund being set up to have this shared service really in the starting up phase to deal with many issues that needs to be done. The design of the logo, the design of the website, opening of bank accounts, all of that, recruitment of first staff, that's very, very quick start for these new conservation trust funds. Next, please. We have some estimates of the cost saving that we have by sharing these services. Like, for example, as POND, I would not need a full-time communication person. I would not need a full-time financial administrative person in Germany. But by sharing the positions, we can have full-time positions doing these jobs with the people that having the right skill set, but we share the service among the different conservation trust funds. We have, of course, only one Nature Trust Alliance office in Frankfurt, which we share, which is also beneficial. And I think, especially in a location as Frankfurt, it will be very difficult to find IT services for only one smaller conservation trust fund. But by pooling the resources, we become more attractive also to have good IT services. We can negotiate better deal for insurances, bookkeeping and auditing. So we really save, on working hours, again, saying that investigations on new topics are done by NTA one time and 4 conservation trust funds can benefit. Next, please. Of course, working with a shared service office also come with challenges and learnings over the last 4 years. At the start, we didn't have really these standard operating procedures in place or the communication protocol. And as more funds join, we noticed that this is really very important. Also, the different directors are all in different locations, so we have to work a lot from remote and via online chats. But really, in the course of the 4 years, we really have improved a lot on these procedures, and communication goes very smooth. We work in different countries. We are based in different countries. NTA knows everything about legislation in Germany, and the conservation trust funds, like me being based in Albania, we know more about the local legislation here, and that's how we divide the tasks. 3 different CTFs. Now we have 4 CTFs, means also 3 different management styles. So our Nature Trust Alliance staff sometimes has to be very flexible, but they are, luckily. We had at the start also quite different expectations, but now things are much more clear, which we go into the next slide. What would I recommend if you want to set up such a shared service office? You really need clear management and governance structure from the beginning. You really have to ensure that the basic procedures are in place. Of course, you can always improve upon that, but basic things have to be in place before launching it. We have to clarify the expectations of the Conservation Trust Fund staff and the shared services staff to avoid misunderstandings. You need this clear communication protocol and easy and clear communication channels. And we have to really define what is beneficial to have in a shared service. Like all these general services we have to do in Germany is very obvious that there's an economy of scale to do them in Germany. And what can be better done by the CTF itself, more related to the grant program. The setup of easy tools to use is important. And at the moment, we have the management structure with 3 conservation trust funds. We recently had a new conservation trust fund joining, but we decide still for this time to keep the management structure with the initial 3 CTFs. And the new members can first join through signing a provisional membership. And then if all things go smooth, they can become permanent members of NTA. Next, please. Then, yeah, on behalf of the entire NTA family, as that's how we call us, I would like to thank you and Faleminderit from Albania and Dankeschön from Germany. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Miriam, and thank you, Paquita. It's wonderful to hear from both of you. And we have had several questions come into the Q&A, so I'm going to read some of them. I encourage people, please, if you have additional questions, to put them in the Q&A. We'll pose them to the panelists. I think, and Maria Luisa is going to correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have the ability to unmute people as well. So I
yeah, you can do that.
Perfect. So we may, in fact, for some of these, I may actually just ask the person with the question to unmute themselves and pose the question directly. So Miriam, 2 questions for you. First, about the Nature Trust Alliance, which came from Camila Montero. The first one, she says, I think the NTA model is really interesting as many CTFs have struggled to cover all their fixed admin costs. And the Nature Trust Alliance creates a model for cost sharing. So the question is, how about the quality of the services and your sense of ownership of something? Like, how do you ensure that you have personalized service for something like communications, which is very unique to each individual trust fund?
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question, Camilla. It's very, it's really, the NTA often provides a menu of which you can choose, and it's up to the Conservation Trust Fund to decide how do we want to do this. So like the websites are managed from the NTA in Frankfurt, but like a brochure, sometimes you also use a service provider. We are very flexible there to see what can the staff do at that moment in the Frankfurt office, and do they have enough time? How much request is there at the moment? And if there are certain areas that need more specialized support, they can also help us with hiring maybe a service provider to help. So it's a very flexible model where standard things really are done in Frankfurt if there's enough time. And if there's time left over, they can also help us with specialized services. But sometimes there's really too many requests, and then they can also help with looking for service providers. So it's like a menu you can choose from. And as a conservation trust fund, where do you want to use the shared services, and where rather you look for other opportunities? And over the sense of ownership is very high, because we are really, the Nature Trust Alliance people are not consultants. They are like our staff. We are a family. We are in constant contact. We know each other. We know how we operate, how we want to have things. We have constant dialogue. Yeah, I hope that answers it.
Thank you. Let me pose one to Paquita, and then a few others that have come up for Miriam as well. So Paquita, a question from Karen McDonald-Gale at CBF. She would love to hear your thoughts on the self-assessment process for the practice standards and versus external evaluations or processes for institutional strengthening.
Thanks, Karen. I really believe that each CTF doing their own evaluation on a more regular basis, say annual basis, is always a good idea. As an external evaluator, I have never been asked to come in just to look at the practice standard application. Usually I'm invited in to look at a broader series of program issues around the conservation trust fund or how a particular endowment has been spent, et cetera. So I think your external evaluators are definitely useful because it just provides you a different set of eyes and a different way to look at it. And obviously in many cases, depending on your the consultant you bring in brings in, particular expertise in different areas. Usually it's pretty expensive versus being able to do it in-house. So I would suggest more on a, every 5 years have that independent look versus the need to, be regularly assessing your own abilities and helping to improve your own processes and use of the practices. That would be my general response.
Great, Paquita, thanks. I'm going to flag also that we are having one of these webinars on self-assessment later in the year. So we'll be able to talk a lot more about that as well. Thanks. Let me, another question from Camilla about the Nature Trust Alliance for Miriam. So Camilla asks about the time involved in management for the shared services. So for you as an executive director, how much of your time is dedicated to NPA management, to the management of the Nature Trust Alliance, like on a percentage approximate basis?
3 to 4%. If you are the focal point as an executive director, it's a little bit more, but it's really, if you're not the focal point at that time, it's really very limited to 1-2 hours a week. But that, of course, evolved over time. When the standard operating procedure still had to establish, we had to invest also much more as directors. But now things are running very smooth and it's decreasing our management time we need.
Thank you. And a question from Kathy McKeaton, also for Miriam, about the Nature Trust Alliance. So the NTA handles financial reporting obligations that you have as German registered charities. Do they also handle other donor required audits or program or project specific reporting?
Yes, depending again on the Conservation Trust Fund where they need help for donor reporting, for example, reporting to the KfW, they can help with the report. For POND, for example, they help with the financial part of that reporting and I do the technical part. So it's really, we negotiate who's doing what and then it's being done very easily. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. We have a couple questions that I think I'm going to ask the questioner to unmute and ask directly. So one from Renan, there's actually two questions from Renan Rocha in Mozambique about the differences between government institutions and an independent CTFs. And so Renan, I think if you're able to unmute, we may ask you to just pose your questions to the panelists directly.
Renan just wrote on the chat that he's not able, he doesn't have a microphone.
Okay, great. Then I'll pose the questions and he'll be able to hear the answers. So the first question was, can the CFA or how can the CFA or its partners help a public fund from Mozambique to improve its internal capabilities? And then the related question was, as a government institution, even though they have a great level of independence, because they're in Mozambique, they don't have the financial resources to help to strengthen the strategic blue economy areas in Mozambique. So they're supported by the World Bank, but looking for ways to increase revenue. So are there advice for how to, for how them to grow and evolve as an organization? And he also has some questions around fundraising. So I think if we could start out, maybe Paquita, if you could talk about some of the differences that you've seen between government and independent funds and how government funds have been using the practice standards to build institutional strength.
Very nice to hear from you and delighted that Mozambique is moving ahead with a strong public institution. What we've seen is both private and public conservation trust funds can use the best practices and the practice standards and try to really improve over time, et cetera. So there's no issues there. There's obviously big differences between how public and private institutions can raise funds. What we're seeing is that public institutions generally do a better job of raising funds on things that can be controlled best by the government, such as taxes on incoming tourists to the country. that would be held, tend to be held by the government. Sometimes offset types of funding are held by the government. And in those cases, public conservation trust funds often manage those funds. Private conservation trust funds are in a better position to manage areas with private foundations, to manage areas where any funder, including bilateral and multilateral agencies, may be concerned about how the funds would get used by the government and how well the funding is differentiated from a wider government budget management, to be able to show that you're really committed to using those funds in the way that the donor intent is in place. And so we often find that private conservation trust funds truly offer a really important service in that arena by being able to ensure greater transparency often than public funds. The Conservation Trust Fund's 2020 Global Vision Local Action, sponsored by Conservation Finance Alliance and written by me with Wolf's Company. I really highly recommend you read that because it kind of goes into some of these differences with public and private funding and how you might find that useful to you in thinking about how to move forward. Good enough.
Thanks. Thanks, Paquita. Scott Lampman has extended Camilla's question to Miriam, and it poses a question about perhaps if there's a downside to the shared services concept in terms of capacity building at the developing country level. So he's wondering, basically, it's about the trade-off. Is there something lost at the local CTF level by using shared services? So Miriam, what has been your experience around the trade-offs between developing a strong institution as the local trust fund versus having the shared services model?
Yeah, me personally, I think the trade-off is just the other way around. Because I'm a regional fund, it would be very difficult to choose to have a seat in one of the countries. So it was very obvious for legal reasons also that we will be registered in Germany. But because we have the shared services office in Frankfurt, I'm able to be based in the region, very close to the region where we operate, and use. Because we have an office in Tirana and Albania, I'm very close, and I can use for the grant program, I can use local service providers here. I have the contacts here, and I can build the capacity here. I'm much closer to our beneficiaries. And that would not have been possible if we would not have had this shared service office in Germany, because we need to report in Germany, we need the services in Germany. And especially, I think now in COVID-19 times, I haven't been in Frankfurt since October 2019, but things run smooth. And I have been focusing on our work in the Western Balkans. So I think I have not seen really the negatives yet.
Thanks. Yaba has two questions, one for Miriam and one for Paquita. I think, Yaba, do you want to unmute or do you want me to just ask? Sure, the easiest way to find out the answer to that.
Hi, Kathy, can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Thank you, and thank you for this great panel. The first question for NTA, for Miriam. In the Caribbean, there are about 10 to 12 conservation trust funds, CBF being the regional partner, and about 10 or 11 national ones that are part of the Caribbean sustainable finance architecture. We work together, we do many things together. And in the past, we have explored very timidly the idea of sharing services like you do, but we are all registered in different countries. And we are a much larger number of potential institutions sharing services. So the question is, how crucial was it for NTA to have all of its organizations either based or registering in the same place in order to have shared services managed effectively?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Actually, we have recently had many requests of other conservation trust funds that wanted to join the shared service offices, and we as partners and members have decided we really want to focus on the ones that are registered in the state of Hesse. So not even in Germany, but in the state of Hessen, because it has specific laws where you have to adhere to. And we use also a certain tax advisor that knows exactly these local laws. And that's why we can make these standard operating procedures so efficient. So for us, it's very important that we were registered in the same place to have it efficient. And we decided also as conservation trust funds, we don't want to make it too big. We want to keep the family feeling and the knowledge sharing and providing each other support and this safe space of exchange. But that's a choice. We have chosen to keep it rather more family based, and that we know each other very well. We always know who we talk to, and not becoming really a service provider consultancy idea. But that's a choice you have to make.
Thank you. Should I ask the other question, Kathy?
Yes, you had a second question for Paquita.
Yes, this one is for Paquita, and it's related to HR systems and resources in general. Sometimes, donors or board members or even staff and other actors see investments in HR as a cost and not really as an investment to ensure proper management of the institution and the resources that we manage as conservation trust funds. So I would like to know what recommendations you would have for conservation trust funds that face this challenge and how to address this. Thank you.
You've hit on a sore point for me. When I see really low levels of overhead being offered by donors, it bothers me, because obviously your investment in your institution is a big part of why conservation trust funds are effective. I really am proud of the work that Wolf's Company and I did on the other book that we're talking about today, which is the Conservation Trust Fund's 2020 Global Vision Local Action, Yaba, because I think one of the things that we really emphasized was how, conservation trust funds have been around for a few decades now. We're not all brand new, and the ones who've really invested, as you say, versus seen it as a cost and have built their institutional capacity and have a strong human resource standards and have really built and brought in that talent, have just been the ones taking the leadership frequently on some of the new transformative thinking about both programs, about building totally new financial streams from blended finance, impact investment, some of the blue economy finance pieces. And so we can really show how that has worked as an investment in these conservation trust funds and the difference that those mature CTFs have made around the globe, as well as just how much additional money they've been able to bring in by having that strong talent team and by having the ability to show their capacity over time. And many of those are now also accredited with World Bank, GEF, GCF, Adaptation Fund, et cetera. So you can see their ability to just continue to build their capacity to invest in the conservation needs and sustainable development needs in their country. So I think that's the way I'm approaching it now, Yaba, is just saying, look, if we really want to have strong, over time, conservation trust funds that really make a difference in these countries, they've got to have the institutional capacity to manage this over time. None of these are short-term investments. And when we see a case of a conservation trust fund being terminated because it was set up as a one-time kind of deal for a debt swap or for something else, we're seeing a real loss in capacity in those countries. So I feel very strongly that we can make that case. I think that book, Conservation Trust Funds 2020 Global Vision Local Action, really points out how critical CTFs are to taking global priorities, which are only going to get worse with climate change and with the biodiversity loss, to how to spend that money on local needs that can make a difference. That's your role, and it's a role that can only happen with good institutional investment. I don't feel strongly about this at all, by the way.
Why not? Great. So thanks, Paquita. I wanted to flag two things quickly in the chat. One is there was a question about what joining the Environmental Funds Working Group. Everyone is welcome to join, and we welcome your participation, so please do. you join the CFA and then you specifically join the working group, and you'll be notified of meetings and projects that are going on, both the original practice standards as well as the 2020 update and the 10-year review were initiatives that came out of the Environmental Funds Working Group. So please do join. The second link I'm going to put in the chat is that the CFA has an online discussion group on LinkedIn where we can continue to have conversations in between these webinars, as well as on other topics related to conservation finance. So please do join us in the LinkedIn group, and we can keep talking to each other there. In addition to the questions that have come up in the Q&A, there's also a hand raised, and I was going to ask Dennis Gamba, if you have a question that you'd like to unmute your mic for. Checking the chat. Dennis, did you have a question? Oh, there you are.
Hello.
Question you want to ask? Yes, hello.
Hello. Now, for me, no, I'm okay for now. Thank you
Okay.
for the opportunity.
Good. Sure, thank you. We still have some time, and so I wanted to, unless there are other questions coming up in the Q&A, what I might do is pose a question to the audience. And again, you all have the ability to raise your hand, and we'll unmute you. So I'd be curious to know, for the CTFs who are on the call, or those who work with CTFs, what are the most challenging human resources issues you've been facing? What are some of the challenges that you've been dealing with? Does anybody have firsthand stories you'd like to share? And while people think, Jabba has raised his hand, thank you. Camilla has mentioned lack of career plans. Jabba, go ahead.
Like Paquita, I'm not passionate about this particular topic. So. I think I can tell you a little bit about the CBF story, and even though we have been successful in many ways, it is still a challenge. And I'll tell you my personal story on this. I'm not sure who's on the webinar, so let's see how this goes. When I was hired in 2014, I was basically hired by myself, and I was given a regional fund to my hands that only existed in paper, with $42 million of pledges and potential deposits coming in. And yes, we had support from our founding donors, but I was literally working by myself for the first 3 years of the CBF. And that was extremely, extremely challenging. I had to do everything, and I was willing to do everything as the new director. But I believe that in our case, the evolution of the institution has taken much longer, because we were not properly resourced at the beginning in the operational phase. There was a lot of investments in the legal aspects of setting up the CBF, and a lot of the financial aspects in terms of getting donors to pledge resources. But when it came to initial operations, there was a little bit of a gap. And we are now almost 9 years, almost 10 years old, legally speaking, operationally 8 years old, more or less. And we're still retrofitting the CBF because of that. So if there's a lesson learned from our experience in the whole matters related to HR and operations, is that operations and HR cannot be an afterthought. It cannot go behind the legal aspects and the financial planning of the institution. It has to be at the same level as the other two aspects when you're trying to make a deal like this one work. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Jabba. I think, that also, for me, that just also resonates with the idea that each of these trust funds, for the most part, are being created in, not in isolation, but in their own countries. So there are relatively few CTFs that are being started in a country where there's already an existing CTF or an existing peer structure. So a lot of in a lot of cases, when the conservation trust funds are created, they're the first of their kind in their country. And I think that really points to a lot of the value that CAFE and REDLAC and AppNet, as it becomes more active, provide as a resource to create an automatic peer group, so that you have others that you can learn from, and that you can just at least have conversations with, to help create some of that capacity at the beginning. Two people have mentioned career plans, or lack of career plans, as one of the issues that you're facing. Does anybody want to talk to that issue in a little more detail? Or has anybody seen a great solution to career planning and succession planning that, Camilla, if you'd like to unmute, we'd be interested to hear some of the detailed thoughts you've had on that.
Hi everyone, thanks. I was just mentioning this because this was something we struggled in Fumbio, where I worked for 10 years, and Fumbio is a big trust fund. I think Fumbio has around 80 staff members right now, so 80 people. And you have, right now, they manage to have different salary ranges and development plans and performance review process. So I think right now they do have everything in place, but in the beginning it was very blurred, like what is going to happen with me if I perform well? Do I have a moment to sit with my supervisor and think about my progress in the institution? So I think for tiny trust funds, it's really difficult to have career plans, but as you start having staff, it's important to think of at least performance reviews. And even if the trust fund doesn't have the conditions, the financial conditions to raise your salary every year if you perform well, there are other non-monetary benefits that you can offer to your staff. I don't know, additional vacation days or reduced times, anything that feels that you are being reviewed and rewarded in some sense. Yeah.
Thanks. Do either of the panelists want to comment on that? Or
Yeah, certainly within the current set of standards, we really push the idea of clear annual goals and periodic written performance standards. I believe it's administrative standard 4, as well as having, obviously hopefully the appropriate amount of resources to be able to provide your staff with the resources they need to be ever more effective. We didn't really address succession planning in a specific way. There's some really interesting models out there right now that, Katie was just talking about the importance of the regional funds for exchanging information, but the recent transition for executive director in the Mexican Fund for the Conservation of Nature, there was also a recent transition in Colombia, is helping all of us learn more about how to think about succession planning at the executive level, and then setting annual plans should always involve giving people stretch assignments and giving them these growth opportunities that we all need to be excited about our work and to keep building our professional capacity. So that would be my response there.
Yeah, from my side, Camilla, yeah, as Pond also, we have, for a long time, we were only 2 staff, and then now we have 3 or 4 people. But within the NTA, we shared our knowledge on performance templates and what can we use, and we decided the directors for a certain format, and then every manager is having this yearly performance reviews with the staff, and the NTA director for the NTA staff. But also we have sometimes these knowledge sharing sessions online mostly, but if somebody has a success or something to share, we put a doodle together, and then this maybe on the management effectiveness tracking tool, or how best to write an annual report. It's free to join, but it's also some acknowledgement of achievements people have had. So we share that in a bigger group. And that's, yeah, it's nice and it's important. Yeah, thanks.
thank you. We are coming up on the hour, so I want to thank Paquita and Miriam, both of you, for your participation and sharing of your experience today. Thank you to both of you. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Maria Jose, could you put up the image of the upcoming webinars just so people have the schedule again? So in May, and these webinars are on the third Tuesday of the month. So the May webinar is on resource mobilization, and we hope you all join us for that, assuming you're all members of CFA, and if not, please join as well. You'll get an email announcing the webinar registration information. And then again, I also just want to highlight that we have the LinkedIn group, so if people want to join us for an online chat afterwards, it's a good place to have a conversation. So, so yes, I think we have, we're actually doing governance and institutional effectiveness in August, but resource mobilization will be in May, and then asset management in June. So we hope you'll join us for the rest of the year, and for those in particular. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks. Bye, everyone.